Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. Scores of people were killed this weekend by gunmen in Yelwata, Benue State, Nigeria. The violence, which occurred from last Friday into Saturday, lasted for about 2 hours and left several houses burnt. The killings are causing mass displacement and threatening food security, especially since most victims are farmers. What steps should the government take to prevent further attacks and protect vulnerable farming communities in Benue State? China has said it will remove import taxes of goods from all 53 African countries it has diplomatic relations with. This builds on a 2023 deal that removed tariffs from 33 poorer African nations. Now, bigger economies like Nigeria and South Africa are included. How can African countries make the most of China's decision to remove import taxes? Ghana's economy grew by 5.3% in early 2025, showing signs of recovery. President Mahama has called it a good step and said the government is working to keep the economy stable. Credit rating agency Fetcher and S&P have also upgraded Ghana's rating as the country makes progress in fixing its debt problems. Despite this progress, Ghana is losing billions each year from gold smuggling, especially to Dubai, with the report showing over $11 billion worth of gold missing in just 5 years. How can Ghana stop gold smuggling and protect its economy? Joining us today for further insights is Ayotunde Abiodun, policy analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Ayo, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you as well. Let's begin with the story of the Benue killings and the insecurity in Nigeria. Before we start, I want to extend our deepest condolences to the families and community affected by the tragic attack in Yelwata, Benue State. This senseless killing of innocent lives, particularly among farming families, is not only heartbreaking but also threatens regional stability, food security, and community livelihood. Ayo, I would like to get some of your thoughts about this incident that happened last week.
Veronica, so first I must say that the situation in Benue is really sad, and I'm also going to extend my deepest condolences to the families affected and the entire people of the state. To address this Benue crisis, I think I'm going to take it from high-level talking point. I had to jot down these four high-level talking points to be able to share my thoughts on this issue. The first would be that there's a need to avoid placing government responsibility on citizens. So one of the most troubling aspects of this discourse around the violence that has been consistent and persisted in Benue State and also in similar parts of the Middle Belt is the tendency to shift the responsibility from the government to the citizens. So we've heard calls over the years for community vigilance, defense groups, grassroots coordination, and all of these calls are just marking the failure of the state to protect its people. We need to understand and remind ourselves that the fundamental extent of the Nigerian government is for the protection of lives and properties. And it is deeply unjust when we ask citizens to protect themselves rather than expecting protection from the government. In a functioning democracy, the protection of life and property is a constitutional duty of the state, and it's not a burden to be shifted to traumatized communities as we have in this instance. So when we have to displace farmers or villagers to organize their own security or to defend themselves, um, it signals abandonment. It's basically saying the Nigerian state has left them to their own fate, and it absolves the political and military leadership of accountability. And and I think the dangerous aspect of it is that it entrenches that narrative that state protection is a privilege and not a right, but it is a right embedded in our constitution. The second talking point I would touch on is the proximity bias in the way we react to tragedy in Nigeria as a country. So if you notice, what we've seen as a trend is that Nigerians often measure the gravity of a tragedy, not by its scale, but by its proximity and location. So I'll give you an instance. We see how it currently plays out in this crisis. So 200 deaths in Benue, we barely get that national discourse. It's more shifted to a particular portion of the Nigerian state. But if we see that similar number in, say, Lagos or Abuja, this would trigger a national outage. You will see the elite mobilized to talk about these issues and also see how the media will be saturated by this. It's important to point out that the crisis in Benue is not getting enough media spotlight, and these attacks have been going on for years. And it's just really sad that up to this point, we still not found a lasting solution to this. So when we don't see, again, it's just really sad. I'm trying to like really cap my emotions at this point because every now and then we're seeing
Yeah.
figures in the news, 200 deaths, uh, and all of these things, but we don't take these issues as a national emergency. We basically treat them as their problem, the problem of what of a particular tribe, a particular region or religion, and this is leading to selective empathy and is normalizing horror, especially when it affects states as important as Benue. Basically talking about the middle belt, which is the food basket of the nation. I don't know if we cannot see that was the word food insecurity dimension to this whole discourse. I think it's just sad because this is a failure of our collective imagination as a nation where only the deaths that feel familiar are the ones that provoke grief and action. That is on my second high level talking point. So the third talking point I think I need to point out to is that there's double standards in the elite response between the North and the South. Um, Veronica, you agree with me that when it comes to the way we have our elite respond, depending on where this sort of tragedy play out, the approach is different. So when killings occur, like in a place like say Uromi, I think one time about I think 11 Northerners were killed in Uromi, Edo State. We saw how there was a response with visible urgency. There was the issuance of statement. We saw them visit victims and demand justice. But you will see that the northern politicians and opinion leaders were mostly silent in that instance. But when this sort of attacks play out and it affects their people, we will see how delegations will be dispatched, community-based vigilante groups will be endorsed, and they will even be funded. And then the federal government is more pressure to act. But when a state in the southern region like Benue is under attack, despite its largely Christian and central identity, you see that the southern elite would largely fall silent, treating it as a peripheral issue. So it's really bad when we're seeing double standards in terms of responses. We don't have that solidarity in response, and this is just an offshoot of how divided we are as a nation. You would ask yourself that uh, why is it easier to say for northern countries or northern states rather to be able to set up vigilante groups, and when southern states want to do the same and comes with a lot of spotlight and scrutiny. So this double standard is gradually becoming institutionalized, and if we don't push back against it, it's going to be a big problem in the future. So when we see southern states want to set up regional outreach like Amotekun or in the southeast, or the Ebubehago in the south, Amotekun in the southwest and the Ebubehago in the southeast, you see that they are met with suspicion and a lot of legal hurdles and even threats of federal sanctions. But when insecurity play out in the north, you see that the state government are quick to, and they are even encouraged to form regional security outfits. So this imbalance is really affecting us as a nation, where you see that some regions are given the space to innovate sort of in the face of security failure, while others are expected to remain dependent on the central authority. And that central authority has repeatedly proven himself to be incapable of protecting the Nigeria people. So it's just a really sad situation. And I think the last talking point I will touch on this is, and here will be where I close out my thoughts on this sad development, will be that there is currently this narrative of bundling this distinct conflict into one historical narrative, and I will explain. So there's a problematic tendency to conflate long-standing intra-tribal tensions in the Middle Belt with the current crisis involving these heavily armed invaders, which have mostly been linked to military groups with transnational dimensions. But the distinction to be made is that these issues are not the same. So yes, we've seen the Tiv and the Junko historically clashed. So have the Indoma and the Agatu people clashed. But what is happening in Benue State today is not a tribal warfare. It is a systematic, recurring attacks on the largely sedentary farming communities by often well-armed Fulani militias. And these militias groups have crossed the law borders, and they acted as if they enjoy some sort of political protection. And this is really bad. And this narrative where we try to bond all of these episodes into one historical soup, it dilutes the urgency and characterizes the nature of this current threat. This is basically a case where um, armed Fulani herdsmen are targeting farming communities in Benue. So this has gone beyond the historical tribal clashes that we used to have in that region. So I think I'll just round up by saying that the tragedy we are witnessing in Benue today is not just about lives being lost. It's a mirror of how Nigeria's structural problem has extended. And we're seeing selective empathy. We're seeing unequal federalism play out. We're seeing elite tribalism and narrative manipulation until we begin to treat all lives with equal urgency and demand that the same accountability from leaders, regardless of geography or ethnicity. And this crisis will continue, and sadly, it might just be normalized.
I mean, thank you very much for the points that you've raised, Ayo. I mean, it's such a sad tragedy, not only to the people of Benue State, but I mean to the people of Nigeria at large. I mean, this tragedy in Yelwata is so painful, and it's a reminder that, we need an urgent prioritization of the safety and dignity of all Nigerians, especially those in vulnerable communities, rural communities, and I mean in Benue State. We call on the federal and the state government, I mean, civil society, traditional leaders to work together to be able to end this circle of violence. Now is the time that Nigeria really needs to invest in security, justice, and sustainable livelihoods to restore hope and stability in Benue State. Thank you, Ayo, for those really, really salient points. Let's move over to the China tariff removal for African imports. How can African governments ensure that small-scale, medium-sized enterprises benefit from this China's tariff-free access?
So I think that's an interesting question to start this conversation. So I think African countries need to come together and adopt an holistic approach that addresses both supply side and market access constraints. So I think first, respective African government need to invest in capacity buildings for their SMEs, particularly when it comes to issues like standard compliance, packaging, branding, and export readiness. What we see in Africa today is that the majority of our SMEs, they lack the awareness or the technical know-how on how to navigate complex export requirements, even when you have situations whereby there are no tariffs. So we just realized that there's a knowledge gap, and I think the first thing the African government needs to do is to come together and solve that knowledge gap problems. I think the next thing they can do is to um, conduct a lot of like export facilitation programs which are tailored specifically for SMEs. So it could be subsidies for certification costs. It could be granting them access to shared logistic infrastructure, targeted trade missions or fairs. Basically, the government needs to work with export promotion agencies to be able to create SME-specific export pipelines. This will really go a long way. And I think we cannot take out technology in this conversation. So there's a need to digitalize trade processes and expand platforms for e-commerce with the Chinese partners. And this can also help to, in the long run, level the playing field for SMEs. So, for instance, we see a country like Ethiopia. Ethiopia a while ago went into partnership with Alibaba. So we can see that this kind of partnerships can help open direct access to Chinese consumers without SMEs really needing to scale their operations without bearing that high cost implication that would naturally come with that. So, and I think more importantly, finally, African government need to put in place a number of policy incentives. So export grants, concessional financing, a lot of public-private export clusters, which can be used to encourage SME participation in sectors that are more aligned with the Chinese demand, such as agri-processed foods, textile, and cultural products.
I mean, I do agree with you, Ayo. I mean, African nations have to have a holistic approach. I mean, we can take a key from the EU, that collaboration as well. We can see what it has done to protect the EU economy and ensure that the nations within that, the EU thrive as well. And I think that it's time for Africa to stand for Africa as well and, be collaborative and, try to harness as much as possible when we have collaborations and partnerships and just kind of like incentives or let's say strategies like this tariff free access as well. And I do agree with you that technology will take, I mean, you can't have those conversations without saying the um, adoption of technology as well and able to push this out. But do you have any other thoughts on this issue? What policies do you think can, increase the production of high quality export ready goods in Africa as well? Or any other suggestion for the government?
So again, policies are the root of this conversation, and I think the first should gear towards quality infrastructure development. So, African government was putting the work. They need to invest in national standards. Um, so basically, make their product marketable. So and that will come with a lot of quality assurance. So we need to see policies that will gear towards quality power, but just you basically prioritizing high quality goods, and to also be great for um, a number of productive capacity upgrading. So policies that will allow African countries set up more industrial parks or improve their processing capability will also be necessary. And we also need targeted skills and technology transfer. So that could play out through targeted technical and vocational trainings, which should be prioritized to equip the workforce with the skills that are needed in manufacturing, processing, and packaging. And to also be nice for there to be um, incentives that will allow for joint ventures with foreign firms, particularly Chinese investors in this instance. And this will help to promote technology transfer and also raise the standards of goods that come from the continent. And I think in all of this I mean, financing is very important. So, um, so policies that would enable more finance to SMEs in Africa is also needed. So, African government should facilitate more credit guarantee schemes, subsidy for export targeted sectors, and more importantly, they need to. So one thing we'll see is that in a number of African countries, particularly for a country like Nigeria, one issue that's over the years in that investment has been the nature of how the land tenure system works. And for years, they've been cries for land reforms, but because of the nature of how the Land Use Act is embedded in the Constitution, and basically take a constitutional amendment process to amend that act. So that has been a problem. So if we understand that real estate and land plays a key role in this conversation, so my last policy advice would be that a number of African countries prioritize land reforms to unlock financing.
Thank you for that. Let's move on to our final story. We have seen the Ghana's economic recovery, but we've also seen them face a challenge of gold smuggling, which is also affecting the economic growth of the country. What reforms or technologies do you think that Ghana can adopt to be able to track and monitor gold production and export more efficiently?
So I'll say that Ghana needs to away from reforms, away from utilizing technology. I think at the root of all of those is there needs to be regulatory reforms to be able to close the loopholes that have been exploited by smugglers. So I would say first, the reforms are twofold, regulatory and the technology. On the technology side, so there are a number of technology options. You can utilize blockchain. So basically, you can introduce blockchain technology to help Ghana build a tamper-proof record of their gold from like the mine to the market. So every transaction, whether land scale or whether through their artisan miners, it can be logged onto a distributed ledger. And this will help to improve transparency and also be able to prevent falsification of export documents and enable like tracing of where each respective tons of goods are coming from. Also, it would be nice to also see more digitalization when it comes to licensing and permitting process. So it would be great if there's like a central digital mining registry, which will make it easier for authorities to track license operators and identify the illegal ones. And if they can also integrate this, because a key, it would be nice to also integrate this with like their taxation and custom databases, because a key angle to this Ghana conversation is how they've lost revenue through this illicit gold mining. So if they can digitalize their licensing and permitting process, integrate it with their taxation and customs database, this can also help for better alignment between the declared production and the declared exports. Again, AI comes into that conversation, AI and satellite imagery, so they could deploy remote sensing and artificial intelligence to help monitor their mining hotspots, especially the artisan. I think where they really have issue is from the artisan side, basically the informal um, gold mining operations. So, and I think AI can really help in that instance because they can be through a technology like remote sensing, authorities can detect wherever unlicensed mining activities are happening in real time, and then this will enable proactive enforcement. And I think my last reform, which touches on the regulatory aspect, is I think there's a need to reform the precious minerals marketing company, which is a public agency in Ghana that is basically vested with that authority and duty to market wherever minerals is being extracted in the country. So I think there's a need to strengthen their monopoly. Um, so I think currently there's a bit of like regulatory tussle between a body like the minerals marketing company and a body like the gold board, which was a recent recreation. So I think the Ghanaian authorities need to streamline that process as to which body has the vested authority to over gold exports, or who will play the supervisory role when it comes to gold mining in the country. I think more importantly, and I think you will agree with me that there's a need for a centralized oversight, um, as this will prevent gold from bypassing the official channels.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Ayo. But I mean, lastly, I just want to ask you, we have seen like them saying they're losing their gold to smugglers and they're taking it to countries like Dubai. How can Ghana strengthen cooperation with international partners, especially Dubai, to be able to curb illicit gold trade as well?
So I think it's important for Ghana to reach out to the UAE because Dubai is a major destination for African gold, and a lot of reporters spotlighted Dubai to be a major destination for illicit African gold. So I think that necessitates bilateral cooperation between Ghana and the UAE, and I think they can go about this in a number of strategies. So both countries can come together and have like a bilateral gold certification or customs verification agreement. So both of I think there's also going to be a need for like real-time data sharing. So all the gold entry Dubai from Ghana must match the gold recorded in Ghana's export registry. Any mismatch should trigger joint investigation and enforcement between the countries. I think both countries can also come together to harmonize their sourcing standards. So I think Ghana can push for the UAE to adopt international norms. So I know the OECD, the Organization of um, Economic Community Development, has this due diligence guidance on mineral supply chains that require importers to verify the origin of whatever minerals they're importing to their territories. So I think Ghana can um, push for the UAE to adopt norms like that. And I think they also need to have like a joint task force that would um on this illicit finance and minimal smuggling. So if possible, there should be like a standing bilateral task force that involves um Ghanaian, Emirati, and international agencies like the Financial Action Task Force. So there can be a coordination of effort to trace and to seize proceeds from gold smuggling and to also prosecute the enablers. I think the bulk of this uh, cooperation, I think Ghana has to do the bulk of the work because they are the ones really at the losing end and they are losing billions of dollars yearly to this. So I think they need to find a way to push the UAE to act right. And I think one thing Ghana can do is to try and leverage multilateral supports. So if they cannot directly go into those bilateral arrangements with the UAE for the UAE to try to sit up and curb illicit African gold entry into its territory. I think Ghana can work with international organizations like the Interpol, the World Customs Organization, or they can approach the World Trade Organization also, so as to expand their financial intelligence gathering, and also have these organizations carry out trainings for their enforcement officials, and they should also utilize regional cooperation frameworks involving other African countries, because you expect that in that chain of flow, some African countries be involved in that. And I think with that, I think those are my thoughts on how Ghana can really strengthen its cooperation to curb illicit gold trade.
Thank you, Ayo, for that. Those were some great points that you raised there. That's all for today. Ayo, it's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us as well. Yeah. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. For deeper insights into our work, visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates shaping the African continent.